Hi, everybody. Matt here from Matt Likes Comics. And today I am very delighted to have as my guest a comic artist and letterer, Mr. Mike W. Belcher. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it that you came. I've seen you on the Silverline live shows with Roland Mann, who was our guest here a couple weeks ago. You people, you guys out there may remember. And you were actually the first one I reached out to that got back to me, which I really appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that you were able to make time for us tonight. What have you got currently in the can at the moment that people out there might be interested in seeing?
Well, most of my work is primarily on my own comic, Man in the Mask, which I've been doing for, close to 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a bunch of other lettering jobs that I do for friends in the comic industry. But like I said, my main focus is Man in the Mask.
And for those that are interested to see the Man in the Mask, I have put the Substack link in the description of this video, so you can check it all out later if you like, or leave now and go check it out. That's great too. Mike, let's think back. Little Mikey. What got Mike into comic books? What was the first thing that made you look at them and go, I like these?
It's like I tell people when people ask me the great question, what was your first comic? I can't tell them because I don't remember a time comics weren't in my life. I was given, obviously, my first comics at a very young age, and I cannot remember the first comic. I can tell you the first hero I loved was Spider-Man.
Very cool.
And absolutely, I said the medium fascinated me as a kid, and I just was absolutely taken by the heroes, and I had to devour every little thing that I could find on them. Which, during that time in the 70s, we didn't have we don't have the options that we have today.
Mm-hmm.
We had the red, brown Captain America, which I was very partial to, and Spider-Man on TV. But other than that, the comics were a big draw for me.
And in that, I would include the newspaper comics. Were you lucky enough to be in an area where that was a big part?
Yeah. My dad had the Sunday paper. We, Peanuts, Garfield, Marmaduke, Family Circus, the whole 9 yards.
So you have been reading these comics then most of your life, if not all of your life.
All my life.
At what point did you say to myself, this is a business I want to get into?
It was I was probably 11 or 12. Because that's, I guess, when it first dawned on me, because that's when people start asking, what are you going to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
And I think I think what I started it started dawning on me that all these guys that were doing these comics that I was looking at the credit box, it's like someone paid them to do this. This was their job. This was their career. And, the John Burns and the Frank Millers. And I just thought, wow, that would be a heck of a job to have. And so that's when I first started thinking about, comics as far as, we all dream of it, doing our own, doing comics, doing Superman, doing Batman, and seeing what we could add to the legacies.
That's really cool. Let's take a minute just to say hi to everybody who's joined us tonight. Let's see. We've got Andreas K. Munin, first as usual. Good that you got in. Hi, K. Munin. And Madam is here. Hi, Stephanie. Mark's issues with Archie Comics. And if you're not subscribed to Mark, you should. If you have any love of Archie Comics at all, his knowledge of the Archie Comics is probably only paralleled by the artists themselves. So check that out. The absolute amazing and awesome Robbie Josephs is here. Hi, everybody, and I mean everybody. We've got Lewis from Second Floor Comics. Hi, comic readers and Lewis. It's good to see you here. And Rob Saint is here. Rob, I'm glad to see you. Brittany's popped in. Hi, Brittany at Comic Showcase Shop. She did her first live stream. If you haven't caught it, check it out over on her channels. It was an interesting little one. She did bedtime stories out of comics, so it was pretty cool, where she did a whole bunch of classics, showed a bunch of classics illustrated. So if you're into that sort of thing, check her out.
Cool.
Yeah, and we've got Diabetic Superman here tonight with looking for his Kryptonian insulin. Good to see you there, Diabetic. And Jeff Jack is here. Jeff, always great to see you. I have comic issues. Don't we all?
Don't we all?
Glad to make you tonight. Glad to see you. Rich is here from Big Nasty Comics. And that's everybody at the moment. Perfect. Those in the chat tonight, please feel free to throw any questions you might have to Mike, and we'll get them up on the screen and we'll ask him. I'm going to start by asking Mike, what was your first work, your first paid work?
On my Facebook, let's see, that would be, well, in college, I did a bunch of things for people just out of whatever. But as far as professional work, it's probably Roland in the 90s. Roland Mann of Silverline Comics. That was probably some of the first stuff that I did. And then after that, I offered freelance lettering to indie publishers and of the like, self-publishers of the late 90s. And I was lucky. I had a nice little run that I did for a bunch of years. Like I said, just providing, lettering services. Like I said, my day job is graphic design, and I thought that was a good little kind of doorway to the comic industry that I love so much. And so I did that for a bunch of years, and then, responsibilities during the day kind of, necessitated I kind of stepped away from it for a bunch of years. And unfortunately, I kind of dropped off with the comic scene for a little bit. But, the thing about it, comics call you back. No matter what you do, comics, they won't let you go.
I know. I sold all my comics in 1999.
Wow.
When I've finally stopped living with other people and I had to have my own place. I didn't have room for them. And so I sold my comics in 1999, but they called me back in 2010 when now I had a house. I had a young kid. I wasn't going anywhere. I found out Buffy had a series and I went out, bought that. Next thing you know, here we go.
There we go.
But you bring up a point that I really would like to know stuff about. I've had artists on here. I've had writers on here. I've never had a letterer before. And actually, when I was younger, I thought about getting into lettering too, because at least until I became a teenager, my penmanship looked pretty good. But these days I can't even read my own notes, but I went to legal assistant school. We learn how to write like a lawyer. So, so my question is to you, what are the best skills needed to be a good letterer? Anybody can write something down.
Well, now today, everything's done digitally. And that's primarily the kind of services that I've always offered is digital, because quite frankly, my hand lettering isn't great. And that's the thing about it is, but I do the methodology. I know the methodology of lettering because, as I tell a lot of people, lettering is one of those things where you never want to be noticed. As the artist or the inker, you want to be noticed, but you never want to be noticed because typically whoever notices lettering, it's because it's bad. It's never, we as comic book readers, we have an idea what comic book lettering is supposed to look like. And so when we read a comic, if something's off, if they're not reading the right way or whatever, that's usually what people pay attention to. But by the end of the book, if they've not paid attention to it, as a letterer, you've done your job. Because again, there's a language to it. There's a way of trying to, you're the person that's putting the glue on between what the writer has and what the artist had created, and you're putting it together and you're trying to do it as seamless as possible without it being overtaking the artwork, because you want the artwork to kind of be the main focus, and the lettering is kind of that little extra polish on it. And so with hand lettering, they used to do it before the inker came on, but now digitally you can do it till the process is done.
And digitally would make it easier to make sure it fits in the little bubble, right?
Oh yeah. You can do all kinds of things to the kerning and the letting, and you can do all kinds of adjustments. But they did that with the hand lettering too. They were able to go in there, like I said before, with hand lettering. They typically started lettering it after the pencil was done, and they would draw in the balloons, and they would take up the space, and that was less work for the inker, to be honest with you. So the inker didn't have to ink over stuff. But nowadays, typically the letterer is the last person that gets everything. I usually don't get stuff to letter till it's colored nowadays. and so I
Mhm.
put the balloons and the sound effects on it after the fact.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So you're the one that, for example, usually gets to choose the sound effect.
Yep.
That is cool because I remember.
Sometimes the writer will write in whatever,
Yeah,
and they'll also give suggestions about what they typically do. But I'm typically the one that goes in.
very, very cool. So, what kind of programs would you be using to do that sort of stuff?
Most people will tell you like Adobe products.
Hmm.
Adobe Illustrator is what I started on many years ago, and then I got off the Adobe train just because it was so ridiculous as far as a monthly subscription. I use Affinity, which is a relatively new. Uh, they're by the Serif company, and it's free now. When
Very cool.
I had to buy it, but now it's free, and it's a whole range of software. But typically you have to have some kind of vector program to do lettering because that way you can draw the balloons and cut them off and
Mhm.
create the tails and like I said, be able to go in there and be arty with it. And so vector programs typically are the most adaptable. So
So, I'm going to use Silverline here as an example because I've got two. I'm going to make myself big just briefly here. I've got two books here from Silverline that you worked on, and the reason I'm bringing these up now, we've got Beyond the Stars, which has your name right here in the top here.
yeah, and I did the logo to it. So
Oh, very cool. And Twilight Grim, which I really enjoyed, by the way.
yeah,
Uh, Belcher right there
yep,
at the end. Now, the reason I'm showing them is because it is not the normal practice of the industry to credit the letterer on the front cover. But
no,
I've noticed that Roland at Silverline likes to credit everybody as much as he can on the thing. Does that make you, is that something that's really cool for in terms of you, or as you say, like would you prefer to be regulated to the background because as you say, if I'm noticed then I've done badly?
it's flattered to be acknowledged by it, but it doesn't bother me when I'm not. I mean,
Very cool.
again, it's a production job. It's a
Hmm.
job that is typically, again, at the end of the process, and it's not known. And like I said, I'm there to help out. I'm trying
Hmm.
to again, I'm trying to put the writer and the art together and be something. And so I've never really needed the credit for it. Like I said, I enjoy doing it, so it's fun to do.
It's very cool. Now let's go back again to where I asked you what you said you started with Silverline, the first company. What characters did you work on back then? And tell us a little bit about the characters you're working on now.
Well, initially it was Silverstorm and a book called The Scary Book, which was a comedy book, and that was like one of the first things. And then I lettered a book called White Devil, and that was actually a sequel to a Eternity at Malibu comic that was done by R.A. Jones, and this was a sequel that he had given Roland to publish as
Mhm.
the Silverline book. So that was one of them, and there was a couple more. Currently, I there's Roland has two letterers, and if
Mhm.
one isn't doing it, I'm the one doing it.
Mhm.
So I've done Twilight Grim. I've done a book called Divinity. Like I said, currently Beyond the Stars. I just took over a book called The Obsoletes, which he'll be crowdfunding next month. It'll be Obsoletes number 3.
Very cool.
Let's see here. What else do I said I've got a litany of books that are coming. I lettered a book called Kalis. I'm on the second miniseries on
Kalis,
that one.
yeah, Kalis was I mentioned when Roland was on. I got 5 books off of him. I ordered them 5 books, and Kalis was the one I liked the most. And I'm going to soon be ordering 2, 3, and 4. Did you do the entire series?
I
Because
think I only
I
missed one
really like.
issue. I think there's only one issue I didn't do. I think I've done the rest of them. I think there's 7 of them right now, and I think I've done 6.
Quick question from Jeff Jack. Silly observation question. For me, comic book lettering in upper lowercase just doesn't look right. Have you done only uppercase lettering on your comic book work?
I only do upper lettering. That's a thing that Marvel does, and some other people think it works. I don't like the way it looks, but I'm an old guy. I mean, maybe a
Mhm.
younger generation may like the lowercase. I don't because I think it's a little harder to read. I think it's harder for it to fit into the balloon as far as making it
I
a certain way.
I
I
certainly don't
prefer the
remember
upper.
many. I certainly don't remember many comics that weren't uppercase. Even
Yeah.
EC, especially, good with that, all that text was all uppercase. And if that had been lowercase, it would have driven probably a lot of people nuts. So
Well, I think the uppercase is because they wanted to make sure the camera could see it when they were shooting film for the
yeah, and
printing
it makes
press.
sense.
Yeah, but nowadays with digital, you can adjust the font size and you can adjust certain things that make it legible for make. I said Marvel, I guess, does it to look different.
My personal feeling about lowercase letters and lettering, they look really cool if they're used as a font specific to a character. Like Solomon Grundy recently has speaks in lowercase, complete lowercase, but they make the big letters big
Yeah,
so that people can read it. But
yeah, that's a style
you know,
thing.
that's a style thing that looks good. But I mean, very cool. So, what are you working on recently? I read you a list of characters I found that were recent, but let's have you. Oh, wait, we got a question. Robbie's asking, does the Letterman put in the sound effects if they still do that today?
Yeah, yeah. I typically, if the writer has it like boom, I try to put it in a way and artistically put it into the sound into the panel where it's not obtrusive,
Mm-hmm.
but that it looks, like I said, it looks like a comic book sound effect. But yeah,
And that's where your actual artist work, like where you do the art for, comes
yeah,
in very handy.
yeah.
Hello, Jason. I don't know if comics need more cursive. They certainly have enough cursing right now.
Yeah.
Excuse me. For example, I've got here Sergeant Flag from G-Man Comics. Can you tell me a little
Yeah,
bit about
I do a bunch of other indie companies. G-Man Comics is one of them. They're great guys. It's Rick Offerman and Eric Bennett. I think they're great guys. They've been very nice to give me a lot of work, and I've done some artwork for them. I did a little 6-page flashback story in their Links book,
Very
but
cool.
I said Sergeant Flag, Links. I've done some of their anthology works. I know they've got a 100 issue special that they're sending me soon.
Wow.
And then some other books I work on are for Starcross Comics. I've done one called Phantom Lion.
Very cool.
And I've been doing one for a guy named Brian Fraze, which he's in Kentucky too, and he does a book called The Eternal, which is an interesting flip, making the Frankenstein's monster into a superhero
Oh, very cool.
and
I know
giving
that
it a
his
very long origin story, which I thought was kind of interesting.
I know Big Nasty out there is a huge Frankenstein fan, so if he doesn't know about it, I'm sure he'll be looking at it soon. So, Mike, another thing that I'm curious about, because you do it digitally, that actually probably decreases the amount of time that it takes to do. So, typical 22-page story, how long?
I like a couple of days to do it, but unfortunately, when you're the end of the production line anymore with deadlines, you're the guy that gets to make up everybody else's deadlines. So typically, I've been called on to get a book overnight, to have it done in a day or so, and because either they're crowdfunding it or they're trying to get into a catalog or they're trying to get to the printing press for whatever reason. So usually I'm the guy. It's like, okay, we were running late on the art and the inking and the coloring. We can't give you as much time as we would like to, or you'd like to. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm typically, I would prefer a couple of days, but
Yeah.
typically it's usually less than that.
Well, I feel bad for that because I work for the government and there's timelines, and when you get it with literally hours to go, you find yourself rushing to make up for the fact that everybody else working on it took forever to get the. I understand that one.
But the sad thing about it, I actually prefer it that way because I actually like, having to get something done in a crunch because it's interesting what I can pull off in that time because I've been doing it long enough. It really it's the lettering is something that I enjoy to do because again it comes natural. I've done it for so long. I'm not really shortcutting things. I really can get it done that quick.
Very cool. Just a moment here. I want to say thank you to Huratan for gifting a membership to the channel. I don't have anything else. That's my only sound effect. So that's really cool. Now, another thing that I'm curious about, you obviously have many contacts in the industry, but are you the one looking for work all the time, or do people come to you more often?
Where it's not a job. I mean, this is a side hustle, wherever you want to call it. Like I said, I have a day job as a graphic designer, and typically people contact me. I just had before the show came on, I had somebody text me that asked me if I was ready to get one of their books. It's like, okay.
Very cool.
So, I mean, every now and then I might, if I see somebody, putting a post out on Facebook or something, looking for a letter, I'll throw it in. I'll throw myself in there for, see if if they, just in case they can't find anybody or they can't find somebody on their budget. That's the other thing. Some letterers are a little on the higher end, and some I try to keep the idea that you're for small publisher, because as a small publisher myself, I know that there's not a lot of finances, and usually when it gets down to lettering, and so there's some guys that do it as a job that are asking for a premium. And I'm not saying that I'm the dollar store version, but I at least try to build an understanding of somebody's budget. I'll usually work with people if I can.
Okay, so now I'm excited about this, because now that I've checked it out, I want to check out more, and I wish I had seen more before you came on. I want to know more about the Man in the Mask, because it looks fantastic.
Hey, I appreciate that. It really, when it boils down to it, it's my love of comics. It's everything. Many years ago, like I said, I wanted, in my teens, I wanted to draw Superman. I wanted to draw Batman. But as I got older and got into my 20s, I started seeing the indie crowd. And I started thinking, I would love to maybe have an opportunity to do Superman and Batman, just because I love the characters so much. But I wanted something that was mine. And the stories that I was coming up with, I thought, well, why give them away? And so I started kind of writing and creating and trying to find my niche. And Man in the Mask was something that I came up with, again, in the late 90s. And I wanted to self-publish it. But the market was just so horrible in the 90s. I was afraid that it would kind of thud. And so, again, it's one of those things I put in the background and put in the back of my head, but I never let it go. And the way I've got it tooled, people will always ask me, well, what's other books that you might want to do? And it's like, well, Man in the Mask is kind of what I want to do in comics. It's this idea that I can kind of turn and twist, and any kind of genre I can pretty much fit it into. So at the end of the day, Man in the Mask is about my love of comics. It's everything that I love about comics. And it's sorry.
I want to say, can you give a bit of description about the character and what he does?
I love the idea of passing on legacies. I've always enjoyed in comics. I was a big fan of the Justice Society and Infinity Inc. and other characters that passed on their name and their mask and whatever. And so when I was trying to come up with the type of comic that I wanted to do, again, I had this idea based on the relationship that I had with my grandfather. And my grandfather was one of my biggest supporters. He always, when everybody was telling me the comic book thing was just, oh, that's cute, but what are you really going to do when you grow up? My grandfather always supported me, and he was and supported me in all fashions, not just the comics, but in everything. And he was of the age of the Justice Society characters. He was in his 60s when I was really getting into the Justice Society, and I kind of likened him to them. And I always said, one of these days I'm going to make you a hero, because you're already a hero to me.
Oh, very cool.
And so when I was coming up with the idea of the modern version of the character, I thought, well, what if he had a grandfather that was running around in this little city, kind of watching out for his community, looking out for his neighbors. And then one day he realizes, well, I'm not going to be here one of these days. And I want someone to take over for me. And he offers his grandson that offer at 9. And the grandson, what I wanted, oops. What I wanted the grandson to do was go through a period of doubt and then come out on the other end of it. And so Man in the Mask is a guy who's continuing a legacy that his grandfather started of looking after the little guy. You know, he's not a guy that can lift a car. He's not a guy that can, you know, is going to be in any kind of cosmic, you know, situation. He's a guy on the street.
You got to admit, lifting the car makes a good cover.
I've
seen it once or twice. Okay, we've got a question from the chat here. Louis from Second Floor Comics, are you worried about a comic creator going to AI instead of calling on you?
You know, that's something that I assume that you could use AI to letter a comic. I've actually had people that do AI comics come to me to letter a comic, and I kind of like look at them and say, well, you used AI for everything else. Can't you use it for lettering? Because I am uncomfortable with the idea of working on an AI comic, because I think it encourages it. Because I'm sorry, these guys are stealing art. And I, as a publisher and a creator myself, this isn't easy. A comic usually takes me months to do. I mean, I'm doing the whole thing from writing, art, coloring, and lettering the thing, and it's a labor of love. And this guy that can put in a little, you know, bunch of prompts to get a comic done. I mean, I'm never going to tell somebody they can't express their creativeness. But when you're using other people's artwork to get there, I've got an issue with it, because I've got friends that would like the work and would more than, you know, be able to fit the bill of some of these guys. So I've very politely usually turned those guys down. But I was like curious, like, well, can't letter your comic too? Because you did everything else with it. Might as well, you know, finish it out with the lettering. So I don't know if in any cases people aren't lettering their comics with that guy.
Well, I do admit I use Chat GTP for my thumbnails, but I'm honest about it. It's only because I don't know how to do anything with a computer. I'm lucky I can turn on StreamYard. So,
you know, AI has its place, but I just really, you know, I don't know.
So Jason from Archivist I Drift has a question. Were you inspired by pulp heroes at all with your work, or mostly other comic book superheroes?
Oh yeah, the pulps. The pulps were a big thing. The Green Hornet, you know, Ron Fortier's Green Hornet series in the 90s introduced me to the character. And then when I found the serials and everything
Green
of
Hornet
that
series was amazing.
It was great. And I have been very lucky to befriend Ron, because that was a huge, and I've told him many times that, you know, the direction he went with that Green Hornet was definitely a big part of Man in the Mask, because he had this legacy aspect that wasn't ever approached with the Green Hornet before. And I thought that was such a heartwarming but also action-packed point of view. So, you know, definitely Ron is a godfather of Man in the Mask, and like I said, the Shadow and all those 40s, 30s, and 40s characters. And then, you know, some people don't necessarily think the Spirit is a pulp character, but the Spirit in Will Eisner's work is a huge
the Spirit
piece.
was a comic book character right from the start. In fact, I think it was a news strip at first.
Exactly. So it was, you know, that's kind of however you want to look. So the Spirit is a huge factor on the way I approach a lot of stories, because it's one of those things where if you don't like what's going on in comics, go make your own. And, you know, I think a lot of things that I loved about comics aren't in comics right now. And I really like the idea of the hero protecting people. And nowadays, comics aren't about the little guy anymore. They're not about the hero putting a mask on and helping out the little guy. It's about fighting the bigger cosmic battles, or the supervillain of the week, or the whatever. that's fun for an issue or two, but at the same token,
Actually, I find a lot of them are people sitting around talking about their feelings, and it just
exactly that
that's
too.
not a
I
comic.
mean, and I believe
That's a young adult novel.
yeah, that's talking heads that usually should only last a page. I mean, action is what comics are about, and why
Mhm.
is the hero? But more importantly, why is the hero even putting a mask on if all he's doing is sitting around with his buddies that are heroes too and
See,
complaining about being a hero?
exactly.
I hate that.
I've said this on the channel a few times. I use the current volume of Supergirl as an example. The first 8 to 10 issues was literally her sitting around with her friends. They go to this cafe, they go to this party. Oh, I like this person. Oh, I like that person. And finally, the last 2 issues, Supergirl's actually fighting somebody, and the book has picked up as a result. And I
Yeah, but
mean,
how long did it take you to get there?
it took them 11. The issue 11, they finally brought in the super. Basically, once the KO was over, Supergirl got the DC KO event was over. The Supergirl got involved with this Superboys crossovers they're doing with all the different Superboys, and
Mhm.
she's the Superboy of her own book, of course. But and now they're fighting people. She's stuck in Kandor fighting something, but it's an actual fight now. So
Don't make the whole comic a fight. I mean, you got to have
no,
perpetuating action that just keeps but you have to have setup and you have everything else. But
mm,
at the same token, if they're just talking, what's the point? That just bores me to tears, and I just can't get into today's comics because of that.
these guys, I'm sorry, these guys are throwing things at me. They're trying to crack me up while you're talking, and it's working at this line here. Supergirl gets her nails done in the neck. It's fantastic.
Again, the problem with modern comics, and this is an old guy on the porch talking. I'm going to be the first guy, but
Mhm.
everything is again about how bad it is to be a hero. The
Yeah,
weight of the burden of being a hero. It's like, well, then why are you bothering? Like I said,
I
that was
know.
one of the first things I established in the comic. I made my character go through a down period because at the
Mhm.
other end of it, I wanted him to be, hey, I've seen the bad stuff. I've been the bad stuff. I appreciate what I'm doing. When I put this mask on, I not only have a responsibility, I'm going to have a blast. This is a
Mhm.
good thing that I'm doing. I'm not taking this for granted ever.
Mhm.
And I'm never going to change that because I think it just is the mistake of a lot of comics that nowadays they've ruined a lot of characters by
Yeah,
removing some vital aspects of what made them cool to begin with, and,
exactly.
and, and throwing in these. When you start throwing in the real world to comics, that's when they start becoming less interesting. At least they always have been to me. And my
Yeah,
mission, and
the issue of Action Comics, I think it was Action 900, that Superman decided no longer to be an American. That was kind of sad, and I know that was during the first. It was before Trump was even elected. This
it
was
was
still
during
during the
Bush. It
Obama.
was during Bush's terms.
And quite simply, like that. That's just why do that? I mean, I'm proud to say that Superman's half Canadian.
Yeah,
I'm Canadian myself, right? So I'm proud to say that. But at the same time, there's a reason why he's truth, justice, in the American way. He's the protector of freedom for everybody, and it's total. It's awesome. But what I found was that Bronze Age comics seemed to have a good mix of the fight and the character development. Superman, for example, I'm going to use him. I mean, I'm a Superman fan. Okay. For example, by day, he's this newscaster because he got forced into newscasting by his new boss. And he has to flip try and fix that and be Superman at the same time. And he solves it by having a little microphone there so that when he's in action, he can still do the Clark Kent voice and broadcast the thing, right? And he doesn't bring a cameraman so that he can do it himself. But you get that part of it, and then and again, while he's doing it, he's fighting the alien from the other world. But that's not the 25 pages. You get a nice mix. And what they call the Dark Ages now, I find that it was more and more starting to get into the psychosis of people. Like Batman is dark. Okay, I mean, Is there a Batman villain other than Catwoman that doesn't have like deeply disturbing mental issues?
Well, until the 90s, there were a bunch of them that had different opinions or different, you know, psychoses and whatever. It just, this is one of the problems that when you start making things darker, where's the limit? You have to keep
Yeah.
on escalating it. And it's like, gets to a point, it's like, are you sure you want to take these characters in this direction?
Yeah.
I mean, there's the problem. And that's the same way with Batman.
Yeah.
Batman used to be about I'm putting this mask on because I never want a kid to go through what I went through. And he
Yeah.
put that to the side. He put his own trauma or whatever to the side. And now
Exactly.
that's all the books are about his trauma. It's every story that they do about Batman nowadays has to do about his trauma. It's selfish. It completely is if you ask me, it's insulting to the character because it's missing the point of the character. If you're constantly just berating Bruce Wayne is damaged, Bruce Wayne is this.
They're
Like,
making
no,
him lose
yeah,
his fortune every second month, it seems.
yeah.
Someone else takes it away. We've got another question in the chat here. Jeff Jack is asking, do you have any unique lettering styles that you've used? Besides thought balloons, ways to convey non-speech thoughts, foreign language, text boxes, etc.
Well, you could do different types of things for situations. And Man the Mask. Now, I very rarely get something in a script by other publishers that ask me to put thought balloons, or the little things that just are the thinking of the character. Now, I do that in Man the Mask just because I grew up on that, and I think I think a lot of people think that the caption replaced the thought balloon, and it really didn't. The caption is a completely different way because the caption is more like if the character was writing it down on a piece of paper. The thought balloon is the actual feelings of the character. And so there's different ways that you can kind of convey that in lettering. And like I said, where you don't have sound, there's different ways of doing pops and if the character all of a sudden quits talking very loudly, you can reduce the lettering a little bit, or you could strain the lettering. If a character gets electrocuted, not only do I do a balloon to with the but I'll do something to the something that'll make it even more with the character. I mean it's just depending on the style of the book. If it's a sci-fi book, I'll do it a certain way, and you can convey different languages and then caption it, or like I said, there's a lot of, and that's the great thing about lettering. There's really no rules what I can't do as long as I'm being legible, as long as I am actually getting the point across.
And does the program you use have spell check, or does it, or is that something you have to check yourself?
I'll usually that's the one thing I tell clients. I'm not an editor. If you're going to give me your script, this better had gone through the channels before you gave it to me. Now, there's some things I can't ignore, and they're usually thankful that I don't let it be ignored. So when I'm putting it on the page, I typically kind of give it a glance and saying, well, that's not how you use that case. And then I'll correct it. But usually with being digital nowadays, I get people scripts and I can cut and paste. So I'm not actually, typing things in a lot of instances. Now, again, if there's things that are glaring, I'll go in there and I'll type something. But usually I'm copying off of script and then formatting it for the page.
Very cool. Because I mean that was one thing I'm sure that old letterers doing old style are a little nervous about, because even today, like you'll be reading, say, Flaming Carrot, and I'm doing this because there is a spelling error on one of the panels, and then you don't see it until it's published,
Well, that was the good thing about hand lettering. I think a lot of those guys were also editors in some fashion, and so when they were doing hand lettering, they knew that they misspelled something. It is easy when you're copying off of a script to put something on page that's misspelled.
What was the other one? Oh my God, I'm losing my train of thought here. With regards to the lettering and things in comics, do you find you enjoy it, or do you find it's just more of a, I'm doing this to be in comics because, and I mean, obviously doing your own thing on the Man in the Mask is ideal. You're writing, you're doing the I'm guessing you're doing your colors as well as you're
Oh yeah,
drawing and
yeah.
your
My son used to do my colors, but he got to an age where he's doing his own thing, and so I don't push it on him. It's my thing. So, and right now I'm doing it all. If you see it on a page, it's done by me.
Very cool. No, I honestly, the small taste I had, it is actually, I'm one of those guys. I've had a small taste. Now I need to know everything. I need to read it all. So I'm probably going to end up doing that in the next few days. But what do you see yourself doing in the future?
I let her. Okay, Silverline. I let her because they're all friends. I let her comics for them. I let her other people's indie comics because I love doing comics. I love doing, I love seeing what other people do with comics. And so I usually get a nice inside pitch of what these guys are working on. And I feed off that. I feed off that creative, looking at that stuff. For right now, people ask me every now and then to collaborate on something, and I just can't do it. My full attention is Man in the Mask, and I've had people like, why don't you go try with DC or Marvel? Or I'm not really, at this age, I'm not really that interested in giving Marvel and DC my ideas. I would much rather, even if it's for a smaller audience, I would much rather put my full energy into Man in the Mask and see, if I can entertain people with my stories, I'd much rather do it with a character that's mine. That's, it's like Tom Mason in Malibu. He often says that, I'll put stuff on my Facebook or pinups that other people have done about Man in the Mask, and he says those are cool, but they're not Man in the Mask because it's not drawn by you. And you can't say that about Superman. You can say, yeah, I love the John Byrne Superman, or I love the Kurt Swan Superman. But there's not that one guy you could say, and Man in the Mask is mine. When somebody compares Man in the Mask, if they do a pinup, they have to compare it to mine because I'm the guy making it. And that as far as the kind of comics that I like to make, that really appeals to me because, again, the character is very near and dear to my heart. And the type of stories that I'm doing, I don't think anybody at Marvel and DC would let me do them, and because they would want me to be of a certain type of story, and it's like I have no interest in the stories.
There's also a bit of a style guide, right? You've got to do it the way you want it.
Yeah. My style is just a combination of just how I draw and also my influences. The Matt Wagners, the John Burns, the Frank Millers. It's just a hot Bruce Timm and Darwin Cook. It's just a hodgepodge.
Bruce Timm has got some great stuff.
Yeah.
Now, Second Floor Comics is going to ask the same question that I was about to ask you. What comics do you currently read and or collect?
Oh, right now, I it's a kind of an oasis or a desert for me at the moment. I have been collecting. I've gotten Dork, but it's on a pile right now. I've not actually had a chance to read it. Right now, I'm not reading a lot of. I read the Return to the Long Halloween that Jeff Loeb just did with a bunch of different artists. It was okay. It wasn't, Tim Sales was definitely missed in that story. But I can't say that a lot of modern mainstream comics do much for me. Dark Horse book called Power Pals was pretty good. I picked that one up last year. My friend Dan Scotty, his webtoon Lavender Jack just came out as a trade from Dark Horse. And if anyone likes kind of alt history, pulpy type of characters, Lavender Jack would be right up their alley. And it's on webtoon for free too, so you could get it both places. But as far as the big two, unless they're doing a backup story or a story that's taking place in the 80s or the 90s or of another time period, that just doesn't really interest me.
Fair enough. We have another question comment. Jeff says he was just checking out some of your covers. Very cool. Your art style looks like it would be adaptable to animation, maybe a cartoon like Invincible. I guess what he's leading up to is any plans on making Man in the Mask into some sort of animation.
Animation would be the ideal. Now, if you've got an agent, the agent will say that's your less money. But from a personal point of view, animation is exactly what I'd want to see. I often tell people I have two goals outside of doing comics: an action figure and animation. That would be the two things that I would want to do. And that's the thing about with Man in the Mask. It's done with an animation aesthetic. I do it on the idea of, I make sure that I can do a style that I can get done a book in a certain length of time. And that's what animation's about. Animation's about how much time do we have to get this across. Now, Batman animated series, all those Bruce Timms are a huge influence.
Well, that's that. I mean, I was going, when you mentioned Bruce Timm, right in my head, it clicked that was probably a big influence on the way you've drawn Man in the Mask, because I can see the influence there, and I like Bruce Timm's style.
Yeah, I miss that kind of animation, because I only made it through one episode of Invincible, and I wasn't too keen on the animation of Invincible, and I have my opinion of Invincible, so
A Munin is asking, you mentioned action figure. What company would you want producing that action figure? I mean, I know that you could easily whip off a few with a 3D printer, but realistically.
There's a couple of really good indie guys that I like. There's a company called Boss Fight. I really like their figures. McFarlane figures are okay. I'm probably one of the few detractors, because there's always one thing about their DC figures I don't like. It's like there's just, I've never found a DC figure that he's done so far. I look at it, it's like, how could you have gotten that wrong? And so I think the McFarlane stuff are a little over. Marvel Legends puts out some good stuff. Hasbro does some pretty good stuff. But as far as like I said, Boss Fight does some pretty good action figures. And I would love, to be approached by them.
Mike, I want to thank you very much for coming tonight. I've enjoyed this. I'm trying to be in a position where I try to bring on as many different people from as many different parts of the hobby as possible, because I have a lot of questions about the behind the scenes stuff, especially, which in my case, I used to have to keep to myself. And then there are these great things called conventions, where you get to meet the people and actually talk to them. And I've had a couple of artists come on I've met through conventions. And then there's yourself and Roland, who I got on because you guys have a YouTube channel that you guys make regular appearances on. And people, if you're not watching the Silverline show at 8 p.m. Eastern on Sundays, you're missing out, because they bring on some interesting guests. They do a lot. You get a lot of inside scoops. You get a lot of I usually watch them before I set up my Sunday superhero show for 9 p.m. myself. I'll have you in the background, like I'll watch it and listen while I'm getting ready for my show. So I really enjoy it. Thank you all for coming today, Mike. You were an absolute wonderful guest, and I appreciate it. And as usual, if you're not doing anything at 8 p.m., people, go watch Nate and his buddies over on Hall Yeah Comics. They have their weekly well, they used to be called FOMO Squad. I'm not sure what they're calling themselves now, but they're fun. And they're, of course, making picks of the week. And my understanding is good old Big Lyle is their guest tonight. So everybody should go check that out. Check out Mike's Substack. I put the link in the
Substack is completely free. The comics there are free. I post twice a week.
You just have to sign up. You just have to sign up. Which I did today. And of course, I put your Instagram on there as well. Thank you, everybody who showed up tonight. If you're watching this on the replay, I hope you enjoy yourselves, and I hope you come back. My name is Matt. I like comics, and I hope you do too. Bye, everybody.